ELI5 Would removing CO2 from the atmosphere to pre-industrial levels have an immediate or longer-term effect on our climate if at all? Here's the thing about CO2. The EPA says in their guidelines for refrigerants yes, CO2 is used as refrigerant-free and that CO2 has a global warming potential of 0. It also has an ozone depletion potential of, yes, you guessed it, 0. Why all these scientists are up in arms about CO2 when the EPA says it poses no harm to ozone or global warming. The only thing CO2 really does is create a greenhouse effect, greenhouse gases and such, which only makes the temperatures feel warmer. It does not actually damage the atmosphere in any way. Long term, yes. Short term, yes. However, we've already locked in 0.5 degrees Celsius of additional atmospheric warming into the oceans no matter what you accomplish with emission rates. Additionally, it should be stressed that the natural climate system has already initiated several positive feedbacks, for example ice albedo and aridification, that are likely to continue amplifying the warming trend no matter what the greenhouse effect is doing for the next 100 years. The tipping point of no return is either already passed or knocking on the door. If we somehow cut our current carbon emissions to 0 tomorrow, we'd still see effects for decades, if not longer. If we had a super efficient way to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and implemented that today, we might be able to mitigate some of the effects of our CO2 emissions, but we'd still continue to see the effects for quite a while. It's very hard to say how deep those effects would impact the planet as a whole, as the global ecosystem is very slow to respond. It's real big. Even if we were able to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to pre-industrial levels, it would only slow down global warming and it wouldn't have an immediate effect on our climate. Essentially, the Earth's climate responds in a slow and complex manner to changes in greenhouse gas concentrations. It would take time to adjust to the lower CO2. X200b. TLDR no, it would slow down global warming and the Earth's climate would have to adjust in a complex manner. There are lots of climate interactions, and with CO2 and methane emissions dominating, we don't know if the system will self-correct or if we have already entered runaway climate change. Glaciers and ice caps have undergone substantial melting, so the bright white shiny surface is being replaced by a much darker surface which absorbs more of the solar radiation, warming up the planet related to the albedo effect. The truth is that we do not have the technology to do that. The CO2 extracting facilities that are experimented around the world today are insignificant in their capacity and would require too much energy to scale up to make a dent. In other words, even if it would help, there is no way we will be able to do it. That is why we tried to reduce CO2 emissions. Spoiler alert, we failed at that too. It would have both immediate and long-term effects. Without as much of a greenhouse effect, seasonal temperatures would likely drop worldwide on average, and we would likely see an increase in pH in the ocean as excess CO2 diffuses back out of it. However, the climate and environment would take longer to respond and wouldn't necessarily just backtrack. It might respond in unpredictable ways. Let's assume you did this over, say, 10 years somehow. You would take CO2 out of two places: the air and the ocean. You would get immediate effects on ocean pH, making the ocean pH rise a good thing, and you would get some air cooling immediately. It would take longer for the heat to come out of the ocean. The truth is that nobody knows what would happen. The initial conditions now are different to what they were pre-industrial. It is reasonable to assume the Earth would continue on a cooler path than otherwise would be the case. The time frame for this, and the magnitude of the effect, are anyone's guess. See, the oceans act both as a huge CO2 sink and as an enormous heat sink. Taking the extra CO2 out of the atmosphere will cause the oceans to slowly release their accumulated CO2, but the heat will still be there, and it will take a long time to dissipate. It would have an immediate effect. The energy remittance to space would immediately increase, though it would take some years to cool down the oceans. So a real effect might need a few years, but for the climate that's almost immediately. My question is, why don't we just do this? We have the tech for it. If companies don't want to stop polluting and governments don't want to stop them polluting, why don't we just remove the pollution? Removing CO2 from the atmosphere is harmful to plant matter. CO2 makes up only 0.04 of the atmosphere.